Hello and welcome back to the Delve podcast. I'm Allie. I'm a staff therapist here at Delve Psychotherapy of Chicago.
And I'm Adam. I'm the executive and clinical director at Delve Psychotherapy of Chicago.
Yeah. So with this podcast, our intention is not for fame here. We literally just want to share value with as many people as possible. We don't plan to run ads, so it's very listener friendly. So if you find value from the podcast, share it with at least one other person. Word of mouth would really help us out.
Yeah, anything you could do to send it along to a couple of people here and there is a massive advantage. Like I said, we said, we just want to get the ideas out there and try to be as helpful as we can. So we'd appreciate the support.
Yeah. Here at Delve Psych, we offer individual, couples, group, and family therapy. Reach out to us for a consultation at delvepsych.com. That's DELVEPSYCH.com. And we also have a blog. You can check that out at delvepsych.substack.com.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Allie.
Yeah. So both Adam and I see couples, and we thought that today something that could be interesting is talking about couples and the conflict within that couple dynamic.
Because especially in therapy, I think the stereotype is that it's just all fights all the time, and therapists are having to break up fights constantly. And there are a lot of therapists that say, I refuse to work with couples because I just don't want to handle the chaos of it all.
Yeah, I feel quite the opposite. I mean, I was intimidated. I was a little scared to start working with couples because it just, instead of just one person that I'm talking to, there's now like two people to kind of navigate. But what I'm finding is it's fascinating, and I'm enjoying it so far, in the sense of like, I like that, when I see my individual couples, I'll often hear about their significant other or, other significant people in their life. And so getting to actually have that other person in the room, and actually getting to hear from them and seeing the both of them interact with each other in vivo, it is a huge advantage. And it just brings up so much more. And I feel like the sessions can become so rich because I'm seeing that like in real time. And not just getting the perspective from one client, but from like both. So it's, yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think they're incredibly rich and can be extremely rewarding. I know of couples that not I know of couples that myself and maybe some of my colleagues or Andrea have worked with in the past that, in part because of conversations that we've had together, have made big decisions about the entire future of their families. And you just think about the impact on things like lineage, etc. I'm not, none of us are taking credit for that. It's their lives and their relationships, of course. But to be a part of some of those decisions, to know that entire new humans have been born partially because of conversations that people have had. Should we keep going? Should we not? Should we try? Should we stop? It can make one feel quite small and quite big at the same time. I think it's just so profound. And I suppose that happens with individuals too, but it's so much more
Yeah.
tangible to see with couples, especially around the idea of, like having kids or getting married or, many of these kind of big picture, even divorcing,
Mhm.
some of these big picture decisions that really affect the whole tide of entire families.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like what can make it so effective is, instead of like, if I'm seeing somebody individually and I'm like, okay, I think this could be helpful for you and your partner to have a conversation about or work on, go work on it like after, after our individual session. I don't know how successful that will be. But having the both of them there together with me, um, I feel like it's easier to get both people like on the same page of like where the conversations need to be had, where the work needs to be had. And so I think in that way, it's a lot more effective versus just like a game of like, I don't know, not telephone, but like, I feel like working with an individual when they're having such hard in their romantic relationship, it's like I can only get through to like the one person, and the one person can only do so much outside of our sessions, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Having two willing peoples in the room at the same time is remarkably powerful. And if they're willing and both trying, well, that's really it can lead to some major change. I will also say too that I love the complexity of couples sessions. For whatever reason, I just really enjoy how complicated they can be. Because if you think about it, in an individual session, you have what's going on for the client, what's going on for the clinician, and what's happening between the two of them. So you got maybe 3 degrees of freedom or something of that nature. But you add one other person, and you sort of double all of that. So now you have what's going on for client 1, what's going on for client 2, what's going on for client 1 in relation to therapist, what's going on for client 2 in relation to therapist, and vice versa, plus what's going on between the two of them. And all of a sudden, you've got this whole matrix and web of interactions. And I do know of some therapists that go even bigger with respect to like whole families. They'll do family sessions. I saw one clinician one time that said, my way of doing family sessions is get everybody in the room at the same time, bring them all in. If there's if the neighbor's involved, get them in here too. It's sort of just add complexity on complexity on complexity, understanding and honoring just how complex these networks are.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, I wish I could remember that person's name. That I can't remember. I think they were a counselor. I wish I could remember who that was.
No, a lot of dynamics going on, and I think I think another way that couples therapy is so effective and helpful too is like, if I'm seeing an individual and they come into session with me, and they kind of they describe to me a fight that happened with their partner. Their perspective is their perspective of the fight, right? It's a recollection from their point of view, with their biases, of what happened, what went on. And in contrast, in a couple session, I can get both parties' perspectives coming in the room, but also like sometimes I see if the couple starts to get into conflict within session, then I can see actually how those arguments actually play out in real time. Like I can start to see like, okay, I'm starting to see like the one person gets really stubborn, the other person really tends to shut down. Like now I'm actually seeing this in real time, and we can like work through it in real time. So that's where it gets really juicy.
Absolutely. And you can miss things. If you're in a partnership, you can miss things. I think that perspective is so important in all of this. And one of my favorite phenomena amongst humans, I love listening to people describe a fight with their partner, because it's so bullshit. So many times it's so much bullshit. One of the most common patterns is I was talking to my partner, and I was telling them that like, here's my perspective and here's my point of view, and it's so obvious that my point of view is obviously correct and completely and totally true. And I explained all of this to them. Oh, what did they say? Well, they said, fill in the blank thing, but and then I was just like, but that doesn't make any sense, and what you're saying doesn't make any sense, and what I'm saying is making perfect sense. And it's like, if we're describing the amount of perspective, if we could quantify how much me perspective versus they perspective there is, it's like 95-5. And most of the time we're misrepresenting what the other person is even saying. It's like, hang on, they actually might have had a good point or a valid concern or a real thing happening with them, and we just brushed over it in a line or two. He said maybe he did want to go talk to his mom, but he was a little bit nervous. And I was like, but that's not even valid. You need to go talk to your mom. It's like, well, hang on a minute. Maybe there's good reason to be worried about talking to mom.
Right. No, absolutely. And a lot of times, like, we assume the other person's intentions or assume the other person's perspectives, when that may not be even what's going on.
Right.
So I guess I'm curious for you, like, how you handle it as a therapist when perhaps couples sessions start to get a little contentious, like within session.
I think it depends on how contentious it is. The vast majority of the time with most couples, I don't think that things get terribly off the rails. Most of the time, conflict is fairly quiet and people are pretty measured. And also they're like behaving in front of another person. So typically people aren't going to like lose it too much. I also try to really hold in mind that if they are, there's real deep distress, maybe even desperation underneath of that. And I try as best I can in the moment to really track where that's coming from. What are these two people fighting for? Because if they're both showing up voluntarily to a couples therapy session to then fight, they're both trying. They're trying something. They're at least trying to get their point across. They haven't given up. And so I really try to honor the fact that it was a voluntary act to show up to begin with, and a courageous act to try to bare one's soul, even if I think often hapless and ineffective. I think fairly often the way that people go about it is pretty bad. I will also say there's a really basic conception of couples therapy, which is that if we can fix the way that couples fight, then we can fix their partnership. And the Gottmans in particular, who are some of the most widely published researchers on couples therapy, they in particular really indicated that it's not about fixing the conflict itself. You can actually have pretty messy conflict with a partner, and as long as you've got really effective repair attempt and repair acceptance dynamics happening, generally speaking, you'll be able to recover, and longevity is possible even in high conflict couples. So it's less about having a longevity. If longevity is the goal, seems to be less about stopping conflict or smoothing out conflict and more about having effective repair patterns.
Oh, that's interesting. So I definitely want to go back to how we repair and how we fight, right? I definitely want to get into that in the podcast, but at least these two people are voluntarily here and trying. Sometimes it's apparent that like one partner was really pushing for the couples therapy, and the other person in the partnership was kind of like, I don't know, given an ultimatum or was sort of dragged along into this process. But regardless, that person is still here. They did still show up because they could have decided like, nah, like I'm over it. Like I'm not willing to try. Like, I give up essentially. So like you make a good point that like even the person in the partnership that seems a little unwilling of the two to be here, not as enthusiastic to be in session, at the end of the day, they're still there. They still showed up. So I think that's important to remind ourselves, like when working with couples. And I thought you brought up a really good point too of like, man, if they're having a blowout, like really contentious fight in front of a third party, in front of like another person, then like, man, this stuff is, yeah, it's cutting deep. It's to be able to be like that vulnerable and that like contentious in front of like another person, like, okay, like there's some really big stuff happening here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great reflection. And I note that I didn't exactly answer your question in terms of how I handle them. I do actually try to teach people how to fight differently, how to actually have the conversations a bit better. Because while I love the Gottman perspective on longevity, I don't think that longevity alone is necessarily the goal. I don't think they would agree that it is either. They've got a whole book called Fight Right that's all about fighting better. So even though they tended to focus on longevity as the outcome variable, they also are acknowledging of the value of learning the kind of mechanics of good disagreement. And I also find that if we can bring down the level of contentiousness in the partnership, typically we can improve the overall level of stability. And I think there's usually some really basic, often very old in terms of old in the relationship or old in the person's individual past, maybe even back to childhood, that really define how they go about conflict in a partnership. And I think through exploring those and really helping them with the exact mechanics of disagreement, I do think that we can get to a greater sense of stability overall in a partnership, assuming that we're trying to continue. But typically speaking, one of the biggest mistakes that I see any individual and any couple making is usually they are fighting for the other person to change something they are doing or thinking. I want you to think different. I want you to do different. I want you to change. And we forget that if a partnership is entirely constructed out of two human brains, it doesn't exist outside of them. There's essentially nothing material about them. It's just all agreements and contracts entered into by these two individual brains. Then you as an individual have half of the power at any given moment outside of severe abuse situations. Or maybe I shouldn't qualify that as severe, but outside of abuse situations and true kind of coercion and control, then you have half of the power. And if you have half of the power, quit abdicating that, waiting for the other person to wield their half the way that you want them to. It's far better to start looking at your own options and your own approaches and what you do and don't accept, the boundaries you will and won't set, and the ways that you intend to approach the other person given the current context, rather than wishing that the context were different.
Interesting. So let me see if I understand this correctly. So instead of trying to change our partner, get them to behave differently, to think differently, what have you, is it then about kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say accepting, but kind of saying like, okay, well, this is how my partner views this situation. I can either accept it or I can do something differently myself? Is that kind of what
Exactly.
you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, and I really harp on personal responsibility, personal responsibility, personal responsibility. You have your half to deal with it. And I think rather than accepting, I think the point is to decide. So let's say you're a particularly affectionate individual and you really like cuddling and closeness in that way. And your partner, for whatever reason, just isn't. The family wasn't that way. Growing up, they were never really that way. Maybe it even makes them kind of uncomfortable. You got a choice to make. You could decide. And I may have referenced this book in the past, but your choices are essentially exit, voice, or loyalty. So you can leave, you can stay and accept things as they are, or you can say something. But saying something doesn't mean so that they will change. It's so that it is known how you feel. saying something shouldn't be an accusation. It shouldn't be a demand. It can just be a clarification on what's important to you, but with no real, like, you say something to clarify your side, not to change them.
Well, I guess I wonder, with the voicing something, can it be an ask? Like, what if something is workable? Like, what if your partner has the capacity to show more affection? They just didn't realize that was important to you. So can it be an ask, like, hey, like, affection to me is really important in a relationship, and I'm feeling like I'm lacking that. Like, would it be possible for us to spend a little bit more time cuddling before bed? How do you feel about that? Is that possible? Like, is that something you can ask of someone?
Absolutely. I think making asks is really important. It's one of the 4 main actions I try to teach couples,
Mhm.
making asks. The thing is, you got to make it an ask, not a demand.
Okay.
And you need to have a sense for yourself what you're going to do if the person says no, or they say yes and they aren't successful at following through. That's still a personal decision. So let's say I want more cuddles, and I ask, and the person just doesn't, they're not that effective at it. I'm still at the point of, okay, so do I accept that, or
Mhm.
do I leave? Or do I, say something else in a different way? What we can get caught in is say something so they change, then say something else so they change, then say it differently so they change. And then I keep trying to get them to change by saying something, and then I say something, and then I say something, and then I protest, and I stop saying something, and I start to withdraw, which is, really not helpful. It's a kind of quiet exiting, and then I'm still here, and then I say something so they change, and then they never do. You're creating your own distress doing that.
Right. Yeah, I see that too. Like the ask and the ask and the ask and the ask. You know, sort of not giving up the idea that they will change. If I just keep asking, then they will. And so I think that's the trap. Um, and so yeah, I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think you like never ask. I think if it's important to you, you can. I think then if it comes to a point where it's clear that this is not who the partner is, this is not in their capacity, then we have the personal responsibility in the couple to either come to terms with that, accept that about our partner, be like, okay, well, this is what I know about who this person is, and so I'm just even though I feel like I'm lacking in this area of affection, I love my partner and I want to be with them, so I'm going to accept that and come to terms with that. Or you can say, you know what, physical affection is really, really important to me, so and I'm not willing to have less in that area of my romantic relationship. Um, so I am going to leave the relationship and I am going to look elsewhere. But I think it's that personal responsibility piece rather than just wallowing in the like, I want this from my partner. I asked them, I told them, and they're not doing it. And I'm just gonna like stay in
Mhm.
this relationship and be bitter and angry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, a great summary of the whole thing. And also, but Allie, maybe they will change.
uh, well, that's maybe a whole other can of worms of like, do should we stay in a relationship expecting the person to change? Because like, as therapists, like, do we believe that people can grow and change? And if so, like, okay, then do we just like give up on our partner if we believe that people can change? Like, do we just like, do we hold on to that relationship with that expectation, or what?
I do believe that people can and will grow and change. I also believe that people will grow and change in partnership because of their partner. The problem is they often don't change in the way you want them to. They
Mm-hmm.
change in some other way.
Right. So we can't like pinpoint and pick the ways in which my partner will change.
Yeah, you can ask, but the other person agrees or doesn't, and it's effective or isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So at any given moment in time, we sort of need to evaluate, what are my goals, what are my needs, what are my values in relation to relationship. How does that jive with what this person is giving me, offering me, telling me here and now? And what's my degree of willingness or unwillingness to continue, which is a personal choice at the end of the day. I'm going to change them on some level, but if I try to change them in a particular way, I'll probably fail. And that's a little shitty, so don't do that. But they will change as a result of being around me, and I will change as a result of being around them. That's inevitable. It's just when we start to try to dictate terms, now we're starting to fall closer to like manipulation territory.
Gotcha. So in this idea of like, how do we fight? How can we fight better? It's the voice, it's the accept, or it's the decide to leave. What other things would you say that you tell couples in terms of like, how can we do conflict better?
Yeah, well, I think the Gottmans have what they call the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which is essentially the death knell of any relationship. And I don't know if I have these off the top of my mind anymore. I think it's criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and there's another one. Yeah, let's look it up real fast. I don't use this as much because I usually try to talk less about
defensiveness, or am I making that
defensiveness,
up?
criticism.
Okay.
Yeah, nice work. Yeah, I tend to try to frame things in terms of what to do rather than what not to do, so I don't always have those top of mind. But yeah, so criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. We should talk about stonewalling is essentially just like, I'm going to give you nothing. I will no response to anything that you're doing or saying.
Yeah.
Pure shutdown. So I would contrast those with, I think of 4 actions you can take. Again, a lot of these are mentioned elsewhere. They're talked about elsewhere. Even the Gottmans talk about them in the book Fight Right and other texts. Many couples scholars talk about these things in various contexts. I've just distilled them into a little bit of a heuristic that I use to try to help people know, like, do these 4 things. So option 1, you can ask questions. These should not be leading questions. They should not be, I'm trying to angle for some outcome. Like, don't you think that my position is correct? Or wouldn't you agree that my mother is the better of the two? Like, we never want to be going down those paths, right? And you don't want them to be closed-ended questions. So like, you mad? You get an answer like, yep. And we're not conversing. You need open-ended questions. Truly, I am curious about what's going on for you. So a question more along the lines of, what's important to you right now? What's so important about this to you? That's a great question. Okay, you can also share emotions. So hard. When people share emotions, they very often share perspectives. I feel like you're just telling me that you want to have it your way, and I don't agree with you. You shouldn't just have it your way. It's like that. Just because you started with "I feel like" doesn't mean you said feelings.
That's not an emotion. Yeah.
It's the most annoying thing that your therapist can say to you, but it's also a frequent refrain because people really struggle to just name their emotions. And then when they start naming their emotions, they'll say, "I'm really angry." And I'm like, "Give me another one." They're like, "Frustrated?" That's the same thing. Irritated? Okay, so we're gonna just, like, you've gone to the thesaurus for anger and just named all them. Anger is the most outward finger pointy emotion of them all. My anger is your fault, essentially, and it's sort of going down the path of a hidden criticism. Then, if I can get them to stop naming those, they'll often go, the next step is to start naming all of the words that typically end in an ED. I'm so neglected. Who neglected you? It's that other person over there. I feel abandoned. who abandoned you, that other person over there. These are the most finger pointy outy emotions that possibly exist. They're hidden blame in almost every circumstance. So we really struggle to find the emotions that are actually about my primary experience, my own experience internally and on their own. And usually when I finally get people to that point, there's a long silence and like, I don't know what I feel. At which point, me as a therapist, I can say, yeah, I know. That's why this has been so hard.
Right. To not say, oh, I feel like attacked or I feel rejected or whatever, because it's like, yeah, then it's about the other person doing the attack and the attacking, the other person doing the rejecting. And I find almost always that anger is sort of the emotion that's on the surface, but there's almost always a deeper emotion underneath that anger. The anger is just like a byproduct of what we're really feeling deep down. Whether we're feeling like embarrassed or lonely, these emotions that maybe like we are not as willing to outwardly show to people because they're deeper. And they're more vulnerable. So
Absolutely. I completely agree. Well summarized again. And I think sometimes we don't even see them for ourselves. I don't even recognize my own embarrassment. I don't even recognize my own fears per se. But they're mine and they're mine alone. I should also clarify, because I basically never talk about this in sessions, and I don't even really get into it in our didactic program, but this is a good forum to kind of mention this. So a lot of therapists will present this idea that there are primary and secondary emotions. The primary emotions are the deep, heavy, hard core emotions that are deep within ourselves. And the secondary emotion is essentially anger and its offshoots.
Yeah.
And it's a really nice, neat, clean little heuristic that we can present to clients that makes a lot of sense. And it helps clients that struggle with that externalizing to really notice the difficulty with recognizing those internal primary emotions. But I should say that there is actual scholarship on the primacy of emotions and whether there is this kind of hierarchy of primary, secondary emotion. And at the end of the day, if we're truly going down the path of epistemology, it actually doesn't hold up. If it does seem like there is such a thing as anger as a primary emotion, and if we're adding a little nuance here, the client that trends toward a internal locus of responsibility and tends to go down that almost habitual self-condemnation pathway, accessing anger as a primary emotion is actually useful.
Right.
So this is a whole conversation that I almost never use in therapy land itself, because I'm almost always dealing with, how do I get underneath the anger? How do I get underneath the anger? How do I help people see that for them, there is a pathway from embarrassment to anger to blame and criticism and fight? I'm trying to help so many people get away from that particular pathway that I don't often get to acknowledge the fact that there is another pathway that seems to be evidenced in the scholarly literature. And this idea of primary, secondary is still just heuristic. I think extremely useful heuristic, but I feel like this is a good forum to say it's a little more complicated than we usually mention even in our didactics.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely nuance to all of this. And there definitely are the clients that like struggle with feeling anger, period. And so it is useful for those clients to go the opposite way. Instead of just like directing all of these emotions toward yourself. How did that bully in 8th grade like make you feel? And let's explore that. Let's not just like blame ourselves in that situation here. Like, that bully was mean to you. Feel that.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Action number 3, we already talked about a little bit. Make asks. So far we've got ask questions, share emotions, primary emotions, if such a thing exists, my caveat notwithstanding, and then make asks. Firstly, you're allowed to ask. If you find yourself asking a lot, chill, and maybe ask less and explore if you can use some of the other skills here. But if it's really, really important to you, then ask for it. Just be willing and ready to respond if the other person says no or says yes and can't. A good ask could be something along the lines of, hey, before bed, sometimes are you up for us like spending a little bit of time cuddling? But also, even that might be a bit broad. And I would encourage, hey, can we cuddle right now? And then the next day, hey, can we cuddle right now? And then the next day, hey, can we cuddle right now? And the client's going to say, well, I shouldn't have to ask all the time. There's no should or shouldn't about it. You decide. Do you want to ask all the time? Do you want to sit in silence wishing that they would do it automatically? They're not getting it. They're not doing it. So you can sit in silence and stay loyal and angry if you want to. Or you can ask every day or you can leave. Those are your options.
Right. And I think people have a hard time accepting that my partner is not going to do this thing that I want them to do.
In the way that I want them to do
In
it
the way that
automatically without being asked.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, but I shouldn't have to ask. Oh, pardon my
I
French.
hear that a lot too. They should just
fucking
know.
phrase. They should just know. They don't, one. And two, I want to reframe this so fucking hard. Man, you could tell I'm activated. I'm dropping the F-bomb. What greater act of loyalty, care, and affection, love is there than I hear what you are saying. I am willing to change my behavior in order to help you feel happier in this relationship. That's what I'm talking about with respect to love. This idea that somebody will be able to, like, I don't know, conjure the mystics and commune with the shamans and figure out what it is that you want and then effectively implement that exactly as you have it in your head. If you want to get into a relationship with a seer, with a diviner, have at it. I haven't been successful at finding that. I don't know any couples that have. But what can work is, hey, this is important to me. Oh, is it really? I had no, okay, I will adapt and change my behavior because I want you to be happy. What greater act of care, love, devotion, acceptance, support, and real commitment is there than this matters to you? Then I will change. Oh,
Absolutely. That shows so much love for the other person and care for the relationship. Absolutely. Was there a number 4?
there is. Offer gifts. Not GIF, not GIFs, not gifts, but gifts. So I think this is really hard for people. Amidst an argument, when you're scared, when you're self-protective, when you're defensive, etc., to do something as an offering to the other person can be so powerful, but so hard to access. And these don't have to be big. I saw a couple that I would say really, really struggles with the Four Horsemen and criticism and contempt and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And in one quick moment in the midst of one of the arguments, one of them just started going like, oh, I see. As the other person was talking, oh, I see. Oh, really? Little stuff like that, back channeling. You've switched from defensiveness or stonewalling to receiving, and you're communicating that receiving. It's a way of saying what you're doing right now is important to me, and I'm listening. That's a little gift. Another little gift could be something along the lines of, I can tell how important this is to you, or you seem like you're having a hard time right now, or even, are you okay right now? Which sounds like question, but remember that's closed-ended. Are you okay is open-ended. It's are you okay right now is a gift in that I'm basically saying it matters to me that you have what you need in the moment. Touch. In certain partnerships, one of the individuals may really want or need touch. in the midst of a conversation or difficult argument. So you put a hand on the shoulder or something like that, knowing whether or not that's something that's invited on the part of your partner. Other times, maybe you just need distance and space, and so a gift could be, I can tell you're thinking really hard about this. I'm just going to sit with you right now.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So just finding more moments for those little opportunities to offer gifts.
Yeah. And those gifts can be offerings of hope or something of that nature, or reassurance, like, hey, I'm upset, but I'm not going anywhere. Or, we're going to laugh again together, right?
I love that.
Yeah. Ask questions, share emotions, make asks, offer gifts. If you do these 4 things and just these 4 things, you will learn about what the other person's needs and perspectives are. You will be able to share your own with much more clarity. And you will find that your overall level of happiness in the relationship improves. Now, the problem is I could spend years working with a couple to just get them to do these 4 things, because the other things are really automatic. We just hurl them into existence in the relationship over and over and over again. And we'll have a period of time in which we don't do them. And then all of a sudden we'll do all the things that we shouldn't do again. Really quick, we call that an extinction burst. And then it feels like a whole kind of reset button, even though skill development has happened along the way. Just doing these 4 things is a matter of facing yourself, your own attachment patterns, your own needs, wants, your own connection to your own decision making, your childhood, your family dynamics, your understanding of the social dynamics. Sometimes you got to battle the patriarchy and your dad and your boss and your work demands and those expectations and financial concerns, just to be able to do these 4 things in consort with your partner. So it's hard.
Yeah.
But these are the 4 things I would say.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think this conversation around like how do we repair can be like maybe a more in-depth topic in future episodes. But I do want to just ask, okay, so maybe we don't do these things well, and we did exhibit some defensive-ness and contempt, and we had a big ugly fight. How do we repair after something like that?
Well, part of what's been so fascinating about the Gottman research is they found that couples they seem to employ their natural resiliency to find a variety of ways of repairing, some of which are completely nonsensical. I remember one of the Gottmans was giving a talk, I think this is still on YouTube somewhere, where he talks about one of the individuals in a partnership would shoot a look, just kind of like fire the eyes at the other person, which on the surface is not great communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they would just fire the eyes over at the other person. And then their partner would give them a shit-eating grin and a thumbs up, which is not good communication, right? That's not a good way to communicate. It's
Yeah.
objectively not. But then the person who shot daggers out of the eyes, would kind of like start to chuckle a little bit, and they'd move on. Still married.
Hey, it works for that couple.
Why though? Like, why and how? And I've seen so many couples who, like, they can be amidst a really knockdown, drag out fight, and one of them just says something stupid, and they both start laughing together. And it's done, and they move on. Like, what the fuck was that? And other couples do really need to kind of actually explicate it and really explain it and really deeply understand. So repair itself can look a variety of different ways. I think the exchange is something happens, one person communicates that they've got an emotion about it, they're upset. The other person does something, and at the end, the person who was upset feels something. So it's stimulus, signal, response, and then kind of emotional effect. What's the emotional effect on the person that was upset? Generally speaking, if the emotional effect is I feel calmer, that system's working. And I love watching how really good couples do this. My brother of all people, who I think you would agree doesn't have all the psychological terminology, etc. Told me about this fight that he had with an ex one time. It's so brilliant. The partner was getting upset about the way that the dishes were getting loaded or something of that nature. And they just shot a little comment over to them, like, put the forks in right, or whatever it is, whatever that comment was. And he looked at her, smiled, and said, "Would you like to try again?" Now, in another partnership, that doesn't work. But they looked at one another and they just were like, "Yeah, all right, yeah, that was sorry, it's my bad." And the fact that they were able to kind of laugh at that together was entirely a construction of that particular partnership. Try it with somebody else, it wouldn't really work. But it was like, I'm gonna find a way to communicate with you in a way that works with you. Maybe it doesn't with others. And we kind of agree to it. And underneath it all is like, hey, we're good. Right. But no, but we're good. And we should probably note that a thing just happened there. That's all. Just
Right.
notice. That's all.
Oh, it's so interesting because I could imagine another partnership of two different people saying the one person saying you want to try that again, and the other person being like, "Excuse me."
Yeah, what the hell's your problem, bro? All right. But that's what's so interesting about this is it's entirely constructed within your own relationship, which means the patterns within the relationship are entirely of your own invention. They don't have to make sense outside of it. I remember with a former partner, if we talked about something related to laundry, and then I took a sock and threw it on the floor, she'd laugh. Like, that's it. And then of course I'd pick it up and go put it away or whatever, right? But like those little ways of kind of bringing humor into it or bringing levity to it, as long as it works within the partnership, is effective. The other thing I'll say is I think that apology is drastically overrated. I think that people think that apology is the way to go because it represents ownership and understanding. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. If the apology is like, "Oh, sorry, we didn't own or understand. We just said the words sorry." And what I've found over and over and over again in couples work is if I can coach the person that's in the listening role to listen effectively and reflect what they're hearing effectively and really get it and give a shit. If I can get them to do that, I can almost always go back to the person who was injured in some way and say, "Do you still need that apology?" They'll almost always say, "Nah, I'm good." Get it and give a shit. That matters so much more than apology.
That's a great quote. Get it and give a shit. And I think that sums up a lot of just like what we can do better in couple.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts before we wrap up this conversation on couples in conflict for today?
I've always got more thoughts, but I can let them go. We're good there, I think.
No, this is great. And we love our couples. We love working with them. And I think this has been a really insightful conversation on like how we can do conflict better, because I think conflict is inevitable in a partnership. And I think actually if you never argue, that's maybe not a great sign either.
That's a problem.
Yeah, because I think then somebody's not voicing something. Somebody's not saying something that's of concern to them.
And
Like,
you're drifting apart typically. That doesn't mean you need to be fighting all the time, but generally speaking, hey, I need this or I've got an issue with this. That should be coming up every so often, not constantly, but every so often. You will need something from the other person.
right. So if conflict is going to happen, then we might as well do it well.
Absolutely. And make that a pursuit. A way of loving your partner is to fight better with them.
Yeah. Love that. All right. New quote for today. Insight alone does not mandate change. That's interesting, Adam, because I wonder if some like psychoanalytic therapists might disagree with you on that one, but
I mean to kind of hearken the psychoanalysts and the psychodynamists. The point of psychoanalytic and psychodynamic psychotherapy really is to lead to a moment of insight. I think most would probably agree that just because you notice doesn't mean that you must change. I think it is often the case that you are likely to change. You probably will change, but I don't think it's a mandate, which is the big point here. And something that I really try to talk to with clients is like, just because you see this with, much greater richness now, just because we fleshed it out, doesn't mean that you have to change it. Maybe you look at your pattern, and you're like, yeah, I am doing that. And I'm going to keep doing it, whatever it is. Now that I see it even more clearly, I can still intentionally decide to keep it the way that it is on purpose.
right, but then it's a choice.
Right, which perhaps that is the change, and that defeats my point. But
well, no, I see what you're saying, because I remember when we're doing like the didactics, like talking about how like for the psychodynamic perspective, like insight is the agent of change. But just because it's the agent of change doesn't necessarily mean it's a mandate. Is that what you're trying to say?
Nailed it. Absolutely.
Okay, great.
So the idea of an agent of change is the thing that creates the change from whatever psychological orientation perspectives, psychotherapeutic orientation perspective. So the agent of change within cognitive behavioral therapy is the shift in the way that we're thinking, especially about ourselves. The agent of change in emotion focused therapy, you could probably say is something like comfort with and interaction with and relationship to your own emotionality. So the agent of change from a psychodynamic perspective is insight. As I see things better, I'll be better able to decide what to do, or I will at least be making decisions with greater awareness of what's happening for me internally and semi-consciously.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But I like this idea of like, okay, just because like we realized that this is something I do as an adult because of this experience that I had as a kid. Okay, do we want to do something about that? Do we want to change the way we're behaving? Like, and we can decide yes or no.
Right. Let's say that you gain greater awareness to your patterns of attentional difficulties and impulsivity. Maybe you decide to change those. Maybe you decide to start a medication or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you say, I like this about myself and I don't want to change. So yes, I see it and I understand its limitations, but I like this about myself and I don't want to change. That's a matter of individual choice.
Right. But I like this idea of like, okay, but now we're actually making it a choice and we're moving through our lives with intention.
Got it.
Yeah. I think this has been a great episode. I hope all you listening gleaned some really great insight from this podcast. Again, help us spread the word. We're really relying on word of mouth with this podcast. So share this with at least one other person. And as always, we offer individual. We talked about couples today. We offer couples, group, family therapy. Reach out for a consultation at delvepsych.com. That's DELVEPSYCH.com. Also, if you're not checking out our blog, I think you're really missing out. Head on over to delvepsych.substack.com for some really interesting, meaty topics like this one.
Thank you so much, Allie. Great work today.
Great work, Adam. See you next week.
See ya.